Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is a special edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast because we're sitting here on Saturday, June 5th,
and
we're talking
doesn't
recruiting.
say Saturdays, but I'll
take
make
one
an
for the
exception.
team, though, right? This is going to make up for all those ones you've missed this last
That's right.
month. How about that?
I got a long way to go.
You got a couple that you owe the fans here, but we're going to talk today. We're going to talk recruiting. We're going to talk two things. Number one, we're going to talk about the commitment of 2022 defensive tackle Donovan Hinish to Notre Dame and what that means. We're going to break down his game. We're going to put on some film. We're going to talk about what Donovan brings to the table. And then after that, we're going to talk about kind of what's next when it comes to defensive line recruiting.
Yeah, and
you got a good
article up right now about that.
Yes, right. And so we're going to talk about who's on the board, really what Notre Dame should do, and what are the opportunities that are in front of the staff. So, let's begin, Vince, by talking about Donovan Hinish. So just some of the particulars. He is listed at 6'2", 270 pounds. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Central Catholic High School. Same high school as his brother, Kurt Hinish.
Makes
if
sense.
some of you didn't know that yet and you were wondering, that name sounds familiar. He is the younger brother of Kurt Hinish, and he gives Notre Dame now 14 commitments. They have an even 7-7 offense and defense, which is really, really nice. He is their fourth defensive lineman in this class. Now, from a meeting need standpoint, Vince, when you look at the 2019 class, you had Jacob Lacey, Howard Cross. Both of those have now basically have a redshirt year because Jacob Lacey was able to take one last year because of COVID. So they have 3 seasons of eligibility. They'll both have 2 when this class arrives.
Okay.
The 2020
Yep.
class, right? So they have. So yeah, then you look at the 2020 class, and you look at Riley Mills and Aiden Keana are part of that class. So they have multiple years of eligibility.
All of them.
Technically, they'll have 3 left, but
Yeah.
I think with Riley Mills, that's probably more of a 2 situation.
Sure.
Then you look at the 2021 class. They signed Gabriel Rubio, who was arguably the top-ranked defensive player in that class.
Yep,
And
no doubt.
I think the strong possibility that Jason Onye eventually moves inside. So Notre Dame was in a unique situation, Vince, where the numbers there, they needed at least one. So this commitment gives them at least one. Numbers-wise, they're okay now. But 2 is the ideal. But at least one of those 2 has to be a stud. And we'll get into that at the end of the show. So what landing Donovan Hinish does is it gives you that guy. That you've got one guy, right? You've met your need.
Right.
You're good.
Yes.
And so that is important. And we'll get into the implications of now having him in the class and what that means and those type of things. So, but first, let's just talk a little bit about Donovan Hinish and just sort of overall what we see from him. And then we'll dive into the film. We're going to pull the film up and take a peek at it. So to begin, I'm going to be honest with people. If Kurt Hinish had never come to Notre Dame, I'd probably bang on this commitment. And I'd be much more down on this commitment. And the reason I say that is because when Notre Dame took Kurt Hinish, my thoughts were, yeah, they had to take him. Their defensive tackle depth chart was terrible. He was a high-effort kid, high-motor kid. You knew you were going to get everything he had at Notre Dame, and that's exactly what he's been. And you look at the depth chart. Remember, Kurt had to play as a freshman. So did Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa because the depth chart was so bad. But you should say now, fast forward to 2022, you've had great success on the football field. You've had, because remember, he signed post 2016. He signed in that first class after the 4-8 season. He stuck with Notre Dame despite the 4-8 season. So kudos for that. But you'd say to yourself, well, look, you're now 2022. You should be recruiting a higher caliber player. That would be my response. Having said that, when I look back at the career of Kurt Hinish and say, and you watch Donovan and you say they're all, and look, I don't try to get into the whole brothers thing and all, but the fact is when you pop on one film, I did this yesterday. I popped in Kurt's senior film and I popped in Donovan's junior film, and I kept going back and forth to see and I couldn't tell the difference.
Couldn't tell the difference, could you?
I mean, there's some little small similarities, but they're so similar. So it's kind of like, just pure talent alone, Notre Dame should do better than Donovan Hinish. I mean, 6'2", 270, he's not that big. He's not an elite athlete, but then I look at it and I say, but I know what the other one did here. And I think there's always room to have at least one kind of kid like that on your roster. Kurt leaves after this year. Donovan steps up. It's sort of like, is he going to be the biggest, the best, the most athletic, the most talented? No, neither was Kurt. But it's good to have those tone setter types, in my opinion. And when I see Donovan Hinish, Vince, that's what he is. He's not a gap closer from a physical standpoint, but he is a tone setter. And there's merit to having kids like that in the roster.
Well, and he is he's one of those emotional. At least based on the film that I'm watching, I haven't obviously seen him in the locker room or things like that. But the way he plays the game, he plays with emotion. And I'm down with that. You know what I mean? Like, you can have a kid who's a 5-star kid who doesn't play with any emotion. And that's great to have that kind of a kid. But to have a kid who plays with emotion and that is infectious to other guys who elevate their play based on emotion and things of that nature, I love that kind of kid. I really do. Those kids that just give it everything that they've got. They play with a chip on their shoulder. And I have a feeling that Donovan is going to play with a chip on his shoulders, very similar to the way that his older brother plays. Because people are going to bang Notre Dame for this commitment. They are, just from a physical
right. And look, the people that don't like this commitment, I'm sympathetic to it because Notre Dame could have had Caleb Artis. And when I watch Caleb Artis' film, he's significantly more talented, in my opinion, than Donovan Hinish. There's other players on the board. You could say, hey, you should be shooting for a class of Ernest Cooper, RJ Cooper, and, Anthony Lucas and those kind of things. But again, this reminds me of to me what separates Clemson from like Alabama and Ohio State. And what people don't realize is Clemson's had like one top 3 class in the last 5 or 6 years. They have not had a class where, they're ranking 1 and 2, because what Dabo Swinney has done is Dabo loves guys like this.
Absolutely.
Dabo takes guys like this all.
Guy,
yes,
right? I mean,
he understands that. Yes, you need not 5 stars like rankings, but I'm making the loose point, the general point of you need those elite players, those 5 stars, those top 50 guys, but you need some program guys too.
Yeah.
And you need some guys that are going to just, look, okay, so maybe this guy is an elite talent, but he needs a push. He needs somebody up his booty all the time to make sure he's going, but you need that hungry kid that you can say, hey, look, you better bring it because that kid is outworking you every single day.
Exactly.
And the fact is,
he'll raise the level.
And Kurt has beat out better players.
Sure.
Simple as that, from a talent standpoint.
Right.
And to me, that is why I'm good with a kid like this. And not just because of what we've seen from Kurt. That's a big part of it. But the family, you're talking about a dad that's had to overcome cancer multiple times. They have character. They're going to work.
Right.
They know how to deal with adversity, all that kind of stuff. But then you look at it and you say, this is the kind of kid that we've seen come to Notre Dame and be a great program kid. And doesn't mean he's just a great backup. And Kurt Hinish has been a 3-year starter at Notre Dame. Right. Actually, he'll end up being a 4-year starter because he didn't start in 2018. That was Jonathan Bonner, but he was a main rotation guy. So he'll be a 3-year starter. He's going to end his career playing in more games than any player in Notre Dame history. Right. I mean, that's just a fact. So I understand, Vince. I really understand some of those that are going to be like, I don't love this hire because just off the film and the rankings, I get it.
I totally get it. But let me say this because you touched on it. And I know you're going to touch on it a little bit later, probably after I have to go. I will feel a lot better about this particular commitment if they go out and get another guy who is
that's going to be a big part of it.
You know what I mean?
They got to balance it with that kind of player.
I'm totally cool with bringing in a guy like Donovan Hinish. I am from a motor level, from an emotional level, from a work ethic standpoint. But I feel like they got to go get that. And I hate to use the stars, but like a 4-star.
No, they need to get a gap closer. I mean, that's simple as that. They need to get a gap closer.
If they do that, I'm on board. Like, I'm totally cool with that because you hit your numbers, but you also got that gap closer, which I think is really crucial. So, it is what it is. I'm not totally upset about Donovan Hinish, and we're going to talk about when we roll his film. We're going to talk about what he is right now. But again, if they get that other guy, then I'm totally cool with this because I think Donovan is going to raise the level of the guys in that room because he's always going to give it everything he's got, just like his brother. And guys are going to have to work to keep up with him if they don't want to get passed on the depth chart. So from that standpoint, I'm totally cool with it.
Yeah, and I think that last part is key, Vince, because it is one of those things where he's got to be a complement to someone else. That's the key.
Absolutely.
He can't be your defensive tackle class in 2022.
Yes. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
He has to be part of insert top player's name.
Yes.
Right. And I'm not talking about converting, Tyson Ford to a 3 technique. right? That may still happen. I'm talking about you got to go out and you now get another guy. So, but before we move into that, let's talk about Donovan Hinish because, I want to look at the film and I want to kind of look. We already kind of know what this film is going to look like. It's going to be very familiar to people who have watched film over the years.
It's going to look very familiar to people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I believe. Kurt was 51 in high school too. I could be wrong
because they both played offensive line, and so there are going to be some offensive line clips in here. Don't pay attention to those. Just outside of the fact that he goes hard and he's strong when he gets his hands on you, that's important. But when you're in high school and you've got talent like that, you play both sides of the ball. I mean, it just is absolutely what it is, right?
So we're gonna mostly let this roll, but you know me, Vince. Every now and then I just got to put a clip back because I just can't help myself. But let's put this on the full screen. You don't need to see our mugs. Let's put this on the full screen. And the thing you're going to see here, the one thing I noticed about Donovan compared to Kurt is I don't think he's quite as big as Kurt. I don't think he's quite as tall or long, or maybe as long. He's not quite as big, but I do think he's better off the ball than Kurt. He's a little more athletic than Kurt was. I think Kurt was a little bit more fundamentally sound than Donovan was, but again, that's based mainly off of what I saw from him as a senior. But I love that you're going to see right there. That's an example. Now, keep in mind, he's playing in Western PA. He's playing in that Catholic League in Pittsburgh. That's good competition.
Stuff. Yeah, right.
But watch how quick he gets off the ball. But look at that pad level. All right, I knew I was going to have to backtrack some here. I just can't help myself. But look at that pad level. Look at him get up underneath, because that's a big boy right there that he's going against.
Yeah, it is.
But look at that pad level. Gets his arms out.
He stands up the offensive lineman. And when you stand up the offensive lineman, now you have control.
I'll bet you $20 that guy weighs more than he does.
And see how when he gets his arms under there and he's now got control. He's moving the offensive lineman where he wants to go.
And that's so important for him because as you watch, he does not have long arms. Neither does Kurt.
Right.
You've got to, and when you're that kind of player, you have to win the leverage battle. And that's something that made Kurt so much more effective this past year compared to previous years because Kurt had so much more burst, but he also play with much better pad level than he'd had in previous years and more consistent moving his feet. We don't need to see these offensive line clips, but we'll show them anyway because it at least shows toughness. He ain't an offensive lineman.
No, he's not. Sometimes he gets a little high.
Yeah, that's an example right there.
Yeah. And
that's what I just said about Kurt.
He can make up for it with his strength.
Right.
But he can't be that high against really good
But look who he's going against here. It's not the same kind of kid he was just going against. This is smaller. This is kind of a D3 kind of kid. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And this is the kind of thing he should be dominating this kid. But you see him, he comes off high. He doesn't come off with the same quickness here that he did before, but shows good block destruction. He kind of does a stack and shed, gets in the backfield, and then you can see the motor. He's got a great motor. He plays with a ton of energy.
So this
is a better job, right?
Yes.
Look at his pad level.
He gets low. He dips his shoulder, makes himself skinny. And able to get through that, and he reads it very, very well. The entire offensive line is
that's
shifting.
The issue Kurt had, Vince. I mean, Kurt had that same problem when he was in high school. Actually, Kurt had the same problem his first few years in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
This is another example of where he's kind of. This looks like it's almost like his job, like he's being told to run through, as opposed to come off. And I wonder if that's kind of part of the thing, Vince. Why there's some of that inconsistency is that a defensive line call? Is he being asked to anchor or it's a two gap there instead of. Because this looks like this. You wonder, is like this is kind of like a bear front, right? I mean, that's what it looks like to you, right?
Yep.
And so, is he two gapping here? What is he? Is he that's kind of a question that I have. So that can be part of it too. But you do see him come off high at times like that. But he's got. Yeah. But what you also see there, Vince, fast hands.
Yeah,
really fast.
Hands. I actually am very impressed with his hands. He's able to shed guys.
Yeah.
Not only with his fast hands, but with his strength.
Yeah, and he's a little bit more advanced than Kurt was at that same age. If you go back and watch Kurt as a junior, he's a little bit more advanced than Kurt was in that regards. Kurt was all about quickness and motor when he was a junior. I mean, it was all about motor. You knew you were getting a kid that was going to give you everything he got. He was a much better player as a senior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's find him. Okay, he's backside here. Backside. So he's the nose. You can't really see him. He's kind of right here.
Yeah, there he is. He gets kind of in the wash and then he gets out of it.
Yep. So he's right here.
Yep.
See the motor.
I mean, he's getting
that's just
for a nose to track down a guy like that. I love that because a lot of times guys will just quit when the ball gets to the outside.
Yeah. Now right there, this is an offensive line clip, but you can see good quickness off the ball here. And again, offensive linemen have to. play with under a little bit more control than a defensive lineman does.
Sure.
That's good pad level, nice forward lean, almost kind of a little bit too forward on that one.
Yeah, because the lineman's trying to pull him down, I think. I think the lineman got into his chest and was trying to pull him down there. That's why he kind of, stunted forward a little bit.
Yeah. I look, again, you're not seeing a kid that's ever going to rank as a 4-star recruit. You're seeing a kid that's going to play with he's a consensus 3-star. I have him as a 3.5 star. He's towards the bottom of the 3.5 star list.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But again, you know what you're getting. You know he's not going to rank high because he's not a guy that has the measurables and tangibles and things like that.
But I bumped that half star. That 3.5, that half is motor and energy and
exactly
emotion. You know what I mean?
Intangibles, that kind of, and that's exactly where his grade came out, Vince. I mean, when you look at it, it was I do think he's a good athlete. I think right here is a good example. This is a nice burst off the ball. Nobody blocks him, but you see that quickness, eats it up. I think he does a better job of finding the ball than Kurt did at that same age, which is important. He's got a little bit more playmaker in him is kind of the point. That quickness, that, all those type of things, I think is where you're going to see a little bit of an advantage, better where Kurt was at the same age. Now we'll see if he can. Kurt, and the thing about Kurt is Kurt made a huge jump as a senior.
Yeah, he did.
And honestly, I didn't love the Kurt Hinish signing when they got him initially. I liked it a lot more after his senior year. Sure. That's when I really was like, okay, yeah, this kid can play. But I did not like that commitment when they first got him because his film didn't impress me as a junior. Donovan's film impresses me more as a junior. Now, Kurt's senior film is more impressive than Donovan's junior film.
I do like the fact that he
There's
does
nice
have
burst off the ball there
in an odd front.
Yeah. Well, he moves all over the place.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
We've seen him at 5 technique. We've seen him at nose. We've seen him at 3. I mean, he has experience moving around, which I do like.
Yeah.
Because that fits into the versatility that we believe we're going to see with Marcus Freeman's defense.
Watch this. This is a nice play right here. Look how fast he gets his hands off the ball, and that guy tries to get to him.
Yeah.
Uses his hands to beat 2 blocks.
Two guys.
Yeah. This is impressive. I mean, he plays with his hands so like Kurt as a junior was just kind of like a bull in a china shop. I mean, he just would kind of come off and face first you and all those kind of things. Donovan does such a better job using his hands. And I would imagine part of that is because he's had an older brother that probably works with him during the summer.
Absolutely.
Who's been taught all those things by Mike Elston.
Right.
And that's the other thing that's going to help Donovan as opposed to where Kurt was is Donovan's going to know what to expect when he gets to Notre Dame because of what he saw from his brother and his brother working with him.
Yep. That's huge. I mean, that is big.
Yeah.
And that goes into the fact that we're not banging this because of the family situation, right? I mean, that's all part and parcel with what we're talking about.
Right. I mean, we have to consider it because that's part of the deal. I mean,
absolutely.
We've seen what Kurt can do. Now, Donovan is not Kurt, right? And he's going to have to come and improve it, and he's going to have to play with the motor, and he's going to have to do all the things that Kurt, he's going to have to prove himself. But what it basically boils down to is you have to understand that building a recruiting class is not always just about landing the best possible player.
Right.
It's about building a roster.
Yes.
It's building a depth chart appropriately. And sometimes that can be landing all highly ranked players. But look, I'm going to tell you something right now. You go look at Alabama's starting lineup. They had 3 stars in their starting lineup last year.
Yeah.
It's a fact. Alabama's had plenty of title teams.
Develop.
Yes.
I mean, guys develop. And whether it's developing from a coaching standpoint, whether it's your body developing, whether it, all of these different things. We talked about it a little bit yesterday when we talked about guys transferring from small schools to bigger schools, et cetera. Guys develop. And believe me, I'm not the guy that I was when I was a junior in high school. You know what I mean? And so these kids do develop. It does. That's where the whole star thing, that's what they are right now. It doesn't really take into account what they may be 4 years from now. So
I think the other thing too, Vince, is some guys aren't even about development. I don't think Notre Dame is bringing in Kurt Hinish with any grand assumptions that he's going to go 2 inches or add 40 pounds. Some guys just have to say, look, you're being recruited to fill a different role than what Anthony Lucas is being recruited to fill.
Yeah.
Or Tyson Ford or Aiden Guevara. That's just a fact. And that's okay.
It's okay.
As long as it's done in the right volume. So you're not bringing in that kind of guy every year at defensive tackle or defensive end or whatever position. But also, again, it comes down to compliment. And ultimately, Vince, that's kind of where this commitment is going to ultimately be judged. Is what does the class look like at the end of the day? And that's going to be the key. And to me,
they're not done. I do not.
Well, they're not done. They're going to try. Now it's about getting it. Now, here's the first thing that you have is now that Donovan Hinish is in the class, that's one less guy you're recruiting. Okay. In regards to, convincing and those kind of things, you've got 3 defensive ends in the class. In my opinion, there's really only 3 defensive linemen they should be recruiting right now, and 2 we're going to focus on in this show. And the first one is we're going to stick to defensive tackle, and that's Anthony Lucas. Now, landing Donovan Hinish does not impact Anthony Lucas's recruitment whatsoever. So one of the questions that we'll get to here a little bit was talking about taking Hinish before Lucas. That was irrelevant. The question is would they, and this is something we had asked for a while on our show, is he definitely a guy that is going to be a take? The question was always going to be, would they have room for a second defensive tackle? That was the question. They have decided that they have room for a second defensive tackle. Once that decision was made, Donovan Hinish was going to be in his class.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that just, but it took some, from my sources, it did take some time to figure out, what your numbers are going to look like.
Sure.
But this doesn't impact, this is not a sign of, this is the question I've been asked. It's not a sign that Anthony Lucas is not on the board anymore. I've asked about this. He is definitely on the board. This is not a sign that they're not feeling as good about where they stand with Anthony Lucas. None of that. This is about they decided they wanted Donovan Hinish, and they had room for Donovan Hinish. There you go. There's some other brothers of Notre Dame players that they're not making room for, that they're not bringing in. And so that's their decision. Now, look, I understand the criticism of it. I get it. And I'm not going to argue with it because I watched the film too. And there's a lot of things you like, but there's also some things you're like, oh, he's no one else. Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State aren't going to recruit him.
Right.
Right. But
Right.
I then would counter, but would they have if they had Kurt on their team for the last 4 years?
And witness what Kurt has done for the team too.
Right.
I mean,
that's
there
the
is
difference.
Part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if Kurt Hinish was at Clemson the last 4 years, Clemson would probably be recruiting Donovan.
Right.
I mean, and I think if Kurt had not gone to Notre Dame, I don't know if Notre Dame would have recruited Donovan.
Yeah.
But you know what you're getting from a family, from a character, from that standpoint.
And I think people have to understand that when you're recruiting a player, it's not just about what they do on the field. That the family stuff does factor in. I mean, are you getting a good kid? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's the be all end all, but sometimes that can be the difference between taking guy A or guy B, right? I mean, those intangibles. Right.
And when we say they're taking him because of Kurt, they're not taking him as a favor to Kurt or the family. It's they know what they're getting in a Hinish, and they think that guy can help this football team.
Yes.
That's it. Because as I said, there's other brothers that have not been recruited to Notre Dame by they've been offered to kind of help the family out, but they've guys that haven't been recruited by Notre Dame. Sure. We've seen that several times over the year. There's a defensive lineman in this class that Notre Dame is not recruiting who has a brother on the team. So that's the thing we have to understand is that they think he can help them. This isn't a favor.
Yeah, it's not nepotism
to the family, right? So anyway, so back to what's next.
Yeah,
Anthony Lucas becomes such a huge player for Notre Dame right now. He has to be in this class, in my opinion. They have to get him. He has to be a take, and he is a take. But he has to be a guy that at this point in time the staff puts the full court press on.
Yeah.
You have to complement Donovan with Anthony Lucas. Okay. And that's the key for me. I'm putting Brian Kelly needs to contact this kid almost on a daily basis. Marcus Freeman needs to be all over him. Mike Elson needs to be all over him. And so far, the latter two have been. I mean, they have been over him, and Brian Kelly has been involved. But now you got to ramp it up a notch. Yeah. You got to ramp it up a notch leading into your visit with Lucas next weekend, and then you got to ramp it up coming out of that visit. He needs to know, like, look, man, you're it. You're the guy, right? You're our guy. You're the game changer. You're the difference maker.
You're the automatic take. Like, you are our guy. Yeah.
Right. So that's a very important thing for Notre Dame when it comes to defensive tackle recruiting. And like I said, Vince, he's a game changer. I mean, he's a gap closer, gap eraser, however you want to do it. Anthony Lucas is unlike many of the kids that Notre Dame has been able to sign the last. I mean, you'd have to go back to the Stephon Tuitt, Aaron Lynch class. to find a kid, in my opinion, that's this good.
Do you have intel on when he's thinking about making a commitment or what his plans are? Any of that kind
he
of
has
stuff?
not really talked about it. I mean,
Okay.
I've heard him mention before his senior year. Heard him mention he's going to take visits in the fall. I don't think he knows. I think he's one of those kids. It's not really a big media kid. He's one of those kids that when he feels it's right, he's going to make the decision.
Gotcha.
I don't think this is a situation where he's going to love the visit next weekend and just be so overwhelmed that he commits to Notre Dame. I don't think he's going to do that. I would love it if that happens.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, you never know. But to me, I think that is next weekend is going to tell us, however, is Notre Dame truly in pole position or not?
Okay.
And if they put themselves in position where he can be that guy in the class, I think
who
that's
are the other schools on his list.
He's visiting Texas A&M this weekend. He's also looking at Alabama, also looking at Texas, also looking at Oregon, USC, and UCLA. Wow. Miami's a weird situation because he grew up a Miami fan. He's a big Miami fan. They offered him, and they had a shot to kind of make a move with him, but they didn't make the move, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I don't know if he ultimately would have gone to Miami, but they would have concerned me. I think Texas A&M are concerns because obviously those schools can do well in Arizona. They do well in Arizona, and he's from Arizona. He's from Scottsdale, I think, right? Mm-hmm. Arizona. So that's a regional advantage that they have. Mike Elko's a darn good recruiter. We know that. Their D-line coach there is a darn good recruiter. We know that. Texas' staff has a lot of momentum going right now, so there's that. And I think Oregon and USC are factors, but I'm not as concerned about them. And then Alabama, I don't know where he is with Alabama, and Alabama is with him. I'm not. That's the one that is an unknown to me at this wild card. Yeah. But no, Notre Dame is in a good position there. Now it's about closing. Yeah, that's what it's going to be about.
That's great.
So, and you got to bounce, Vince. Before, so I'm going to finish this off. But do you have any questions or any questions? Yeah, do you have any questions for me, Vince? Do you have any comments you'd like to make about Donovan before we get going?
At first I was not overly enthusiastic about it, but after watching the film a little bit more and understanding who his brother was, and again, they didn't take him because of his brother. They took him because they know what this family is and where Donovan could be. And again, from a personal standpoint, I love those high energy, high emotion, hardworking guys. I mean, and that makes up for some talent.
You can have too many of them on your roster.
You can,
but you can also have too few.
Yes, there's a fine line, and again, what people need to remember is they're building a roster. They're not just looking for high end guys.
That's something I think has hurt USC over the years. Yeah. I think it's something that at times Urban Meyer didn't get enough of these guys. Yeah, and he made the adjustments later in his career at Ohio State and went for more of those guys. I think it's a problem that Kirby Smart has a little bit at Georgia.
Sure,
I think he recruits too many names and not enough program guys.
Yeah. Because you need
those
guys.
I think that's why they don't win as much. And Clemson recruits a lot of kids like this, especially along the lines,
right?
And it works for them. And I think Notre Dame is. I think, and that's the tricky part that Notre Dame is in now, Vince. And I know you got to run, but let's just finish this last part. Is
you're good
as you up your recruiting. It can be challenging to find that balance.
Absolutely.
And that's the challenge they have is they have to make sure they're not taking too many of those guys, but also they can't then avoid those guys because all of a sudden these bigger name guys are interested. Right. You have to strike that balance, and you have to figure out which positions is it okay to take those kind of guys.
Yeah.
And which positions like receiver, secondary, running back, linebacker that you should be taking those guys. I mean, these guys should be coming along the defensive line, offensive line, occasionally tight end, occasionally linebacker. But the skill positions need to primarily be get the best players you can get. But I think this is where this is where there is a role for guys like that. So Vince, that's going to be it for your portion of the show. I know we got the community garage sale going on today, which my wife and I have we've put up a fence around our yard to say no, none of you weird garage sale people are allowed to come by our house because we're not. We did that 2 years ago. We got rid of a bunch of stuff, and it was like this is weird.
Yep. All right,
so we're not doing it.
All right, everybody. I will see you later. Hey, stay high on Donovan Hinish. I think it's going to be a good one. And as long as they come through with Mr. Lucas, this is going to be a great defensive tackle class. So I will talk to you guys later. Have a great Saturday, and back Monday.
Now, here's the other part of this recruiting the defensive line that I think it's interesting is it's not just about Donovan Hinish at this point in time. I think it's also about Cyrus Moss. And I think Cyrus Moss is important in two ways. Number one, obviously, if we're trying to talk dream class, you add Donovan Hinish. You add Anthony Lucas and Cyrus Moss, dream class. Best D-line class Notre Dame has signed under Brian Kelly. Best Notre Dame defensive line class they've signed in decades. Because unlike the 2011 class, which had elite defensive ends, you're now outstanding and inside and outside. So I think that is the home run. But then beyond that, let's say you miss Anthony Lucas. I think that makes Cyrus Moss even more important because then I feel a little better about moving the defensive end down to 3 technique. Not just Jason Onye, but maybe Tyson Ford does grow into that. You can feel better about using him as a 5 technique in your 3 downs, using him at times as a 3 technique. It gives you that flexibility. So I think Cyrus Moss also becomes important. Now, Anthony Lucas is going to be on campus next weekend. Cyrus Moss is going to be on campus, I believe, the weekend after that. So you have them on back-to-back weekends, and it makes those 2 incredibly important. And look, if you can get them both, that's a home run. If you get either one of them, you still have an outstanding defensive line class. But those guys become super important because for me, it's just about you need that one more dude in this class to impact the interior, whether it's Lucas, who directly impacts it, or Moss, who impacts it in a little bit more indirect manner. So I think that is where the focus for Notre Dame has to be moving forward. And look, you could argue that there's not a more important recruitment on the entire team right now than Anthony Lucas. That's where I'm at with this. Not great player and all that, but he's kind of like that final piece to this whole puzzle when it comes to building an elite front 7. And that's where I'm at with him. And as we've made clear very many times, if you have a great front 7 or great front 4, it makes every part of you better, and especially the secondary. And that's why it's so important to get these high-level players. And it's not just about rankings. I don't give a rip about rankings of Anthony Lucas and Cyrus Moss. I care about their film and their talent. And their film and their talent is elite. Lucas ranks as the number 27 player in the country by 247 Sports. Cyrus Moss is number 26. That's pretty on point for me. I have both of them as 4.5-star players. I rarely give out 5 stars for juniors. I just, I tend to be a little bit more critical. I want to see the development, but both of these guys are on path to be 5 stars. If they continue to make improvements as players, and it's not much, I'm telling you, their grades are just right here off of that top 25 grade, which is what a 5-star is. They're outstanding players. And so to me, that's the key to making this work. That's the key to making this defensive line class an elite defensive line class, is you got to get one of those 2 guys. If you get both of them, Mike Elson deserves another raise and Marcus Freeman deserves another raise at that point in time. But you got to get one of them to truly have that kind of elite gap closing defensive line class. And I think especially with Lucas. So that is going to be it for this breakdown. I'm going to go into some questions now because there's a battle raging here in the comment section about this one. And I want to add some clarity to that conversation and answer some questions, and then we'll wrap things up because I know it's a beautiful Saturday here in Granger, Indiana, and I'm sure it's beautiful where a lot of you are. So we'll want to get to that. But I did want to get to your questions and comments about this commitment. So let's just get up here. We have our introductions. Notre Dame 2164 is in the house. Kyle McMurtry's in the house. Frank Anthony's in the house. And Frank is still thinking about grad transfers, baby. He's still thinking about a Caleb Evans who's currently at Missouri. So let's get into the questions. Joseph Wan says, not a fan of either of yesterday's commits, but I am more comfortable with Hinish because I trust the defensive staff more than the offensive staff. I think that's very fair. That's a very intriguing comment, Joseph, because it's hard to push back on it. And you can kind of say, like, look, we probably would have had a similar reaction when they took Kurt Hinish, right, back then, but it worked out, right? So, not a ton of people were fired up about Myron Tungvaloa when they added him late in the process. Not a ton of people were fired up about Jeremiah Wusu-Koromo when they added him late in the process. And those things have worked out. We haven't seen they work out with the offensive staff nearly as much, especially the current offensive staff. So I think there's a lot to that. But, and look, I'll be honest. My opinion of Donovan Hinish has sort of evolved over time because at first it was strictly just looking at the film and being like, no, they need to do better. They have to do better than that. But then you start kind of taking some of the other things into it. What's this having to do with roster building? What does this have to do with culture building? What does this have to do with the certainty of you kind of know what you're going to get. You've known this kid for a while. I mean, the first time they met Donovan was when he was in middle school, because it was when they were recruiting Kurt, when they were doing in-home visits and things like that. So there's a comfort level there with, I know what I'm getting from this kid. And I think that's part of it too. And then Ronald, I think, hits on what a lot of people are thinking. Ronald says, if he plays like his brother, I'm good. And I think ultimately that's where it comes down to. D-Rock is in the house. Old Grim says he was happy to see this. He likes that. And Mike Robbins says people don't like the lack of offers. And I get that. And I think his only 3 big offers were Notre Dame, Pitt, and Virginia Tech. And then after that, it was like Central Florida and Memphis and programs like that. So I mean, I think there's something to that. Let's see who this is. I'm going to pull up Facebook real quick so I can know who. I bet you it's from Rob. Let's see here real quick. Yep, Rob says this one. This is a little bit about yesterday. He says, I don't understand why we took Cain Madden. I think Rocco Spindler's a beast, a more talented. Plus, look at the future. I don't believe we always play our best 11. I agree with that. And I think, as we talked yesterday, if Cain Madden is as good as the staff thinks he is, then it makes sense. If he's as good as I think he is, then I don't think it's a good pickup. And I think this is a case where we should all hope that the Notre Dame staff is correct. All right, David Knight's in the house. Okay, and then D-Rock also says this. Confidence there for the defensive staff. The jury's still out with the offense, as the hosts say, development. And that's really where this comes down to. I don't know if I would be as understanding of taking this commitment if it was somebody else. Frank Anthony says the kid plays hard and is tough. I'm happy with this commit. Kai S says, I like this commitment. I like his aggressiveness and hunger. I see a disruptive player, but Lucas is still on my want list. This commitment doesn't impact that at all. And that was a concern that I think a lot of people had yesterday. Cal says he likes his motor. Jonathan says, I like him better than Kurt at the same age. And I agree with that. I think it's, again, at the same age, I think Donovan was more athletic. I think Don was more productive. I think Donovan has faster hands. I think Kurt was just a little bit more powerful. I think that's the difference at the same age. But from a tools standpoint, I do think Donovan is better at the same age. Now, Kurt was better as a senior. Kurt made a big jump as a senior. But as juniors, when you compare them at the same age of development, I think Donovan was a better player. And I think he was it's somewhat close, but it's not. I mean, it's clearly Donovan. All right, here's where we get down to. So Brandon says, if Notre Dame takes all these players that I'm hearing, or takes no matter what, then this class could get to 28. How is that possible? Example, Moss, Lucas, Merriweather, Nwankpa, Rice. So first of all, I don't think Zach Rice is a take no matter what guy. I don't. I think there's some other offensive linemen that they would be more than happy with, and they'd be willing to close their class out if Zach Rice doesn't want to make a decision soon. With those other guys, look, the reality is the odds of Notre Dame striking out or batting 1,000 with all those guys is slim. I mean, it's just they're going to miss on one or two of those guys. I mean, right now, if I had to predict the class, I would not predict Rice to be in the class. I would not predict Nwankpa to be in the class. I would not predict Moss to be in the class. Now, I think Notre Dame is in it with all 3 of those guys, as we've talked a lot about in the shows, but I wouldn't predict those 5 guys. The second part of it is there's plenty of ways to make that work on the current roster. If you're going to get those kind of game changers, you figure out ways to make it work. You figure out ways to make it work with your current class. Like, hey, look, we love you, but look, you do what you do with Jack Nickel. You tell them, hey, look, there's not room for you. That's what I would do with it. But I don't think they're going to get all those guys, and so I don't think it'll be an issue. But hey, you know what? That's a great problem to have. I'd love for Notre Dame to have that problem. If Notre Dame has that problem, take Rice off, but with those other 4 guys, and they've got to get up to 27 or so because of that, make it work, figure it out, because you can't turn down those kind of players. And then Brandon kind of has a lot of comments here that I want to address. I'm going to kind of put a lot of them up at once. Brandon says, I don't understand using a scholarship on Hinish before getting a commitment from Lucas. Just seems like there are limited spots available and elite talent still on the board. Number one, this one I'll address specifically. There was never a one before the other, because if you were going to wait, then if you were going to take Lucas first and that was going to impact taking Hinish, then you wouldn't have taken Hinish. Those two weren't necessarily opposite of each other. They decided they're going to take Hinish, and that's going to matter. That they're just going to take him. That doesn't impact Lucas at all. They've figured out they're going to have ways to make it work. I think that there's going to be some scholarships coming available that maybe we don't expect over the next year, and I think that's going to allow them to make these kind of pickups. Brandon says, I could see Notre Dame getting absolutely 3 of those 5, more likely 2, but could even get to 4. I think getting to 4 would be a challenge. And, but let's find out. But here's the other thing too, Brandon. If Notre Dame's going to have a chance to get to 4, we're going to know by the end of June. And that's going to give the staff plenty of time to reshape their board. And there's some guys that maybe they were going to take that they cannot take, they may not take now, that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to happen. And then David says in response, I think because his brother plays for Notre Dame, it has something to do with it. I'm not calling it nepotism, but it factors in. And then Brandon responds with maybe, but they're not taking Alex Bauman and his brother's on the team. Alex is kind of the same league of prospect, both consensus 3 stars, I believe. Okay, first of all, they're not taking him because of his brother. They're taking him, the impact that his brother has is it's a known commodity. You know what you're getting. You've seen what you're getting from Kurt in the last 4 years, and you know that Donovan is a very similar type of athlete, a very similar type of person, and obviously comes from the same family. So it's more about the known commodity of his brother as opposed to they're doing any sort of favor for his brother. It's more of a Nick Martin situation than it is anything else. Regarding Alex Bauman, yes, they're both consensus 3-star players, but number one, Alex plays defensive end. Kurt plays defensive tackle. There's a difference because Alex is at a position where Notre Dame is loaded up. And also, I think that is a position where you need more raw talent. I think you can get by with a shorter, not elite nose tackle than you can an edge player. And I think that's just a fact. And Notre Dame has not taken a lot of edge players that don't have either high ceilings or some sort of skill there. So I don't think this is about the brother. And then he goes in to say, Brandon says Clemson didn't take Langston Patterson, who was a solid LB, whose brother's on the team. I don't even think they offered him. Again, that's not what this is about, Brandon. And I understand where you're coming from. I do. I'm not banging on you at all. I understand where you're coming from. That's not what this is about. They think Donovan's a good football player. They think Donovan can help them. This is a staff that has not been shy about passing on brothers. Now, yes, they've taken brothers. They've taken twins in the same class. They took the Aguaras. They've done that, but they've also passed on some guys. They did not recruit a Cyrus St. Brown very hard. He was a guy that they kind of let go somewhere else because they understood that he wasn't really moving the needle for them. They like Donovan and what he brings to this class overall, and that's why they're taking him. So it's not like I understand where you're coming from, but it's not because of his brother. That's not the influence that his brother has. David Knight, thank you for the super chat, David. I appreciate that very much. I love the debate in the chat. Having been a lifelong fan of Notre Dame, I have seen this guy as I don't know what that word is, yet they end up having an impact. Carlos Pierre-Anton, 6'4", 240, let their play on the field speak for itself. I get that, but at the same time, we do have, at least I do. I mean, that's my job. We have to be willing to say, hey, look, this is a mistake, or this is a miss, or they shouldn't have taken this guy, or, look, the staff in some ways should get the benefit in some areas, but you have to earn that, right? And we've seen that in some of the earlier chats, people saying, hey, I'm willing to give this more of a benefit of the doubt because we've seen what Mike Elston and the defensive staff and Matt Bayless have been able to do with these types of kids. I also think on defense, there's a need, a little bit of a greater need for sort of a motor kid, a tone setter kid. And I think that's what Donovan brings to the table. So that's where I'm at with all this one. And then Jim says, great news about Lucas, coach, but numbers are a worry. They're not a worry for when it comes to Anthony Lucas. I'm just telling you, I've looked at the numbers. I think Notre Dame could get to 24, 25 and be fine. I think there's a way to get past that. You got to make some tough decisions with some older players and some fifth years. But the fact of the matter is for some of these guys, it's worth it. It's worth taking those kind of guys. David also says, Brian, could he be another Bryant Young, or is that too lofty? This is referring to Anthony Lucas now. It feels unfair for me to say that because Bryant, we look back, we now know what Bryant Young became. And I also, it's unfair for me to say that because I don't know what kind of recruit Bryant Young was. I was in middle school when Bryant Young came out of Notre Dame or came out of high school. So I don't really know that one. But does Anthony Lucas have the ability to be a dominant college football player? Absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's what I say, he's not a gap closer. He's a gap eraser. I mean, he is that good of a player. And Brandon says, good thing about Lucas is his parents seem to want Notre Dame. That is true. And I think he likes Notre Dame as well. Ronald says, from what I've been hearing, it obviously wasn't a high star rating. It was high motor, work ethic, and most importantly, high character. And I agree. And I think there is a place for it. Look, having been a part of building rosters at a completely different way than the way Notre Dame does, but the one thing you have to think about is where's our culture coming from? It can't just come from us. It can't just come the coaches. You have to recruit players that fit the culture you want to establish. So if your culture is about working hard and overcoming adversity and all, you need to bring in kids that do that and can live up to that. And the standards bearer when it comes to those type of culture things doesn't always have to be your best player. If it is, that's great, but it doesn't always have to be. You can be a tone setter and be a rotation guy. That's just where we're at. Jim says, Coach, was this one of the silence that you knew about? It is not. From as of last week, I was saying that I still wasn't even sure if they were going to take Donovan. There were still some question marks, and I think it was Mike Singer at Rivals. Somebody told me that Mike had said that they thought he may commit after his visit. Well, he hasn't visited yet, so clearly something happened here. Whether it was him getting the go-ahead before the visit or what, but circumstances have changed. He made his commitment, and I think that the Notre Dame staff's probably going to be pretty happy about this one. Dylan says, I was very shocked with the 2 commitments yesterday. Definitely feel like they're not players they needed to take quite yet. I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. I think if Donovan's name was Donovan Johnson and he didn't have a brother at Notre Dame, I think there could be a case where maybe they wouldn't have taken him. But that goes back into what we said earlier. It's not so much that you're taking him because of his brother or some kind of family favor, but because you know him, you know his brother, you know that family, you know what you're getting. You're going to be more comfortable and confident taking this kind of kid who maybe doesn't have the measurables and all those other type of things that you tend to look for in that kind of player. So I do think him having a brother here influenced Notre Dame's decision to take him. I agree I think that's absolutely true, but not in the way that I think some are saying it, in that like, well, we took him because his brother's here. That's not what I think this is. This is they're about the same size. This kid's even more athletic. This kid's a little bit more productive. We know the family. We know what kind of work ethic they have. You got to think about this. They've known Donovan Hinish for about 5 years. Mike Elson has known this kid for about 5 years. They know exactly what they're getting. And they feel like this is the kind of kid that they need in the program, not just about the talent. Justin Knox says, good to keep that pit pipeline healthy. Donovan has higher upside than Kurt. I agree. Searcher Green, I would like to know if Freeman put any effort into recruiting Donovan once he was hired. Any idea? I don't think he needed to. I don't know if he did or didn't, but that wasn't needed. The only thing he needed to do was sit down with the defensive line coach and say, is this a kid we want to take or not? I mean, look, the reality is, if Notre Dame wanted Donovan Hinish, he was coming to Notre Dame, right? I mean, so there were other places he should have spent his time, in my opinion. Now, I do know he had at least one conversation with Marcus Freeman. I'm pretty confident in that, but this isn't one that Marcus Freeman should have spent a lot of time on. There's other recruitments that are more important that if you open up the door and said, hey, you got a spot, he was going to come. I mean, I think we all know that. The Bears man says, Dylan Riggins, this is in response to Dylan, I personally feel like Cain Madden was an important ad. Give Spindler a year to get stronger and adjust to the college game. If nothing else, he's a much needed depth piece. And I get that, and I get the need for more competition, and I get all that kind of stuff. But I also feel like because you have inexperienced players like Rocco Spindler, right, like Andrew Kristofic, they need all the reps they can get. And I think that's where, if Cain Madden's not as good as the Notre Dame staff thinks he is, then this could hurt them. Because you're not getting the player you think you're getting, and B, now you've taken a lot of reps away from those more talented players that need those reps. So that's why I say I really think that is a boomer bust type of pick. And if they're right, then it's going to work out great. If I'm right, it's gonna hurt them, not just this year, but potentially in the future. Brandon, so we're on the same page now. Yeah, you explained that perfectly earlier about taking Hinish. Thank you. And again, I love the discussion. I mean, and again, I like that you came in pushing back on that. Because I think, look, Brandon, the thing is, you vocalized what a lot of people are thinking. Trust me, I've gotten a lot of texts to back up, and they're asking me the same exact things you're taking. So I love the fact that you came into the chat, that you asked those questions, that you pushed back in those nature that on this offer and on this commitment and allow us to talk about it and say, hey, look, whether you like it or not, here's the reasons for it. And I think there's room to say, hey, you know what? You guys maybe should have waited on a better player. I get that. I mean, like I said, Caleb Artis is a better player than Donovan Hinish. But I don't think for Notre Dame it was just about who the better player was. I think there's more to it than that. So, again, appreciate you coming into it and offering the things that you said. Justin Knox says, plus Kurt is absolute leadership material, certain material that never hurts, and it things that in that family. I think yes, I agree with that. All righty, I believe this is going to be from Rob as well. And Rob, if you want to, I think I sent you the link to the YouTube channel. The best way to get into the show and have your name show up and leave super chats and all that is to actually watch through the YouTube channel. And I think I'm going to stop putting it on Facebook because we've been having this issue. But Rob asks, do you think any prospects will commit in June? Yes. Well, they got Donovan Hinish. I said the other day that I think they're going to get 5 commitments in June. And Donovan Hinish was not one of the guys that I had on there because my latest intel was that there was still some uncertainty about whether or not, he would be a take at this point. So when I said 5, Donovan Hinish wasn't part of it. And so I think that they'll get at least now. Now I'm even more confident they're going to get 5 in the month of June. So I think this is going to be a very big month for Notre Dame. Now, will it be an elite month, the kind of program defining month? We'll see. But I think they'll at least have a very good month. All right. Brandon says, too bad we didn't get Amon-Ra St. Brown. Definitely think Indy could have used him. I don't know if that was worth the headache, to be completely honest with you. I really don't. And not even just with Amon-Ra. All righty. I know, right? Searcher Green, look at David Knight being all fancy with the words. I mean, I literally don't even know how to pronounce that word. He totally got me on that one. So I feel a little unintelligent right now. David, thanks a lot for that. I'm just kidding. I think it's great. All righty. Brandon says, for me, it's not as much about the players as it is about the scholarship numbers. Thanks for easing my concerns, Brian. And I get that. I really do get that. And that was honestly, when I had my first conversations about this yesterday with people, that was my concern is, does this mean you can't take a 4th receiver? Does this mean you can't take a 5th offensive lineman? Does this mean you can't take a 5th or 6th DB? Does this mean you can't take a 2nd running back? I think those questions are legitimate. I just feel like this isn't a commitment that they rushed into. This is one they've been putting a lot of thought into for a while. So for whatever reason, they're comfortable with it. Whether that means they know they're not going to take certain positions, or they maybe know some spots are going to come open on the current team that maybe we don't know about yet. For whatever reason, I think that they look at it and say they're comfortable with it. All righty. John A1 jumping in late because Hinish was an unexpected take. How many spots are left on the defensive board? So I think there's still room for 1 defensive lineman, and they would take 2 if it's the right 2. So to me, they need to get one of Moss or Lucas. Lucas being number 1 simply because of position fit. They're both elite players. They would take both if they needed to. And there's 2 linebacker spots, and there's at least 3 DB spots. I think they could go to 4 on the DB spot. So I think they want to take 2 corners. I think they want Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore. They want at least 1 safety. They would take 2 if it's the right guy. So I think this defensive class is going to be a bigger class than we've seen, and it needs to be. I mean, look, they struck out at safety 2 years ago. They struck out at linebacker 2 years ago. They only got 2 linebackers this past year. So I think that to me is where it is where they're at when it comes to defensive recruiting. So that's a really good spot. But I think they're going to load up. And I think this is one of those years on defense where they're going to take as many top-level players as they can get, because they know that the future on defense and a lot of positions is not as good as it was in recent years because of a couple of years of down recruiting under Coach Lee, who did a great job as a coach, but not as a recruiter. I think they understand that, hey, look, we got to replenish this big time, and we got to take a boost in production and a boost in talent big time. So I think that's where Notre Dame is at. All right, Dylan Riggins in response to the Bears. I can see that need to watch some more film on him, but from a glance, just concerned about the value he brings compared to grabbing another 2023 commit or getting Spiller a year of experience. 22 commit, I would imagine, Dylan, is what you meant, but I agree with that because 2023 is not going to be impacted by Cain Madden. He's a 6-year senior. He'll be gone after this year. And 2022 commit, actually, I mean, Cain Madden's commitment doesn't impact recruiting at all. He's going to be gone after this year, so it really doesn't matter. Tori Phillips asks, what schools are the competition for Lucas? He's at Texas A&M right now. Texas still in the mix. USC's in the mix. UCLA, Oregon are in the mix. Alabama has offered and is in the mix. That's the one school, however, I'm unsure of the interest on both sides of that one. So I'm still trying to do some digging on that. But I think Notre Dame's in a good place right now. All righty. Now, and Sergio Green, I got what you were saying. I was referring more about if Freeman wanted him, hoping Freeman came in, loved what he saw in Kurt, and decided he needs Donovan. That's what I was referring to as well. I don't think that Mike Elston has the authority or would want to have the authority. I shouldn't say authority. I don't think Mike Elston and Marcus Freeman's relationship is such that Mike Elston is going to take a kid that Marcus Freeman doesn't want. I don't think that Marcus Freeman doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that's going to be sentimental when it comes to getting recruits. I think it's, okay, state your case. Why can this kid help us? And then he coaches up Kurt, sees what Kurt brings to the table, and I think he realizes, like, yeah, we need kids like that in our program. So if Marcus Freeman didn't want Kurt Hinish or Donovan Hinish at Notre Dame, I don't think that he'd be at Notre Dame right now. I definitely don't think he'd be at Notre Dame right now. John A1 says, I like the pickup if he's a better version of his brother. Hopefully he earns his way into the rotation. And with the talent upgrades Notre Dame landed, does he have the talent to push those guys? Yeah. Does he have the talent to push those guys alone? It's not going to be on talent alone. It's going to be the same thing with Kurt. It's going to be about motor and just getting the most out of his potential and just showing up every day and just leaving it all out in the field. He's like the scholarship version of Rudy, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, and I mean that more about the movie version of Rudy. Where Rudy was like, hey, you got to calm down. He's like, if I calm down, I'm not going to be here. That's the kind of mentality that Kurt Hinish brings to the table. That's the kind of mentality that I think Donovan needs to bring to the table. And that's going to allow them to play above, to produce above their God-given talent level. And again, I think you need some guys like that. Justin Knox says, do we know how many NFL guys Cain had full films against so I can go watch what we're getting? I don't know of that. I'd have to look at, it was an all-conference USA schedule this year. I did a film breakdown, Justin, on him at irishbreakdown.com today, and I broke down 5 games, and I did Louisiana Tech. I did I'm going to pull it up here. I did Rice. I did Appalachian State, Western Kentucky, and Florida Atlantic are the 5 games I saw. Some of them you can get on YouTube. There's like just O-line video of Marshall. So if you just type in Marshall O-line against, I think, Rice, UAB, and Appalachian State, there's just O-line video of that. I'm blessed to be able to have access to some all 22 film. So the film I watched was all 22 film, and that's where my opinion comes from. It's those breaking down those 5 games plus watching some highlights of some other games. So that's where I'm at. Brad asks, Brian, do you think Indy offered Cain Madden because they were concerned about guard position after spring ball, or is it just adding someone for depth since Gibbons left? I think it's both. I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think that Jeff Quinn has done a very good job developing the younger players. Just simple as that. And I know some people are going to lose their mind and hit the down button and all that other nonsense, but whatever. It is what it is. You have this great talent, this highly regarded class of 2019 with all these highly ranked players, and only one of them started up to this point in time. And the other 2 guys are getting passed up by a true freshman and a 6th-year senior from Marshall. I think that says as much about the development as it does about those players. But I do think there's concerns. I think they want to add competition and all that kind of stuff, and they want to add depth and all that. But I think if they had if Jeff Quinn had done a better job developing those younger players, I don't think there'd be a need for it, in my opinion. Tracy Timpton, always awesome show as always, Brian. I appreciate that very, very much, Tracy. Very much. Ronald says, you pronounce it nouveau riche, means new money. French, amigo. I did not study French. I studied French for like a week in the 6th grade. We had some lady come on, and she was teaching us French and showing us some cool things, and I was never good at learning. You guys listen to me. I don't have a mastery of the English language. What do you think I'm going to learn another language? Come on. All righty. Old Grim says, I think the O-lineman is a huge fail. Matt D. So I got your text yesterday during the other show, and I apologize for not responding back, Matt. But now that I'm laid up after foot surgery, I finally have time to watch live again. And this is your second surgery on that foot, right? I'm hoping it's your last one on that. Then you can be good to go. D-Rock says, and we're glad to have you in the show, Matt. Great weekend show. Remember to press the like button before you leave. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Have a super weekend, everyone. Same to you, D-Rock. David Knight says, Brian, I wish sometimes we could call in to fully explain our questions. 200 spaces does not provide you a full complement of what we're trying to say. I would limit the time 5 minutes or less. David, I've thought about this. There's two issues with this. Number one, technology. I don't necessarily have the technology right now to do that. Number two, look, if somebody calls in, and I'm not saying you would do this, but if somebody calls in and says something inappropriate, I don't have a mute button. I don't have like your radio show ability to mute what they say, and I'm held responsible for that. And I mean, you don't have to. Look, YouTube's not exactly shy from demonetizing people. And so I'm going to be honest with you, as a business owner, that concerns me a little bit. But, let's maybe you and I have some off the record conversations about some ways maybe we can get some more full questions in there. Because I definitely understand that sometimes there's a lot more to say it and to 200, like you said, 200 spaces, 200 characters is not really the ideal way to get all that in. But we'll chat about it. Brad S., if Notre Dame doesn't get Lucas, would they take Caleb Artis, or is there someone else for DT, or do they just take Hinish and are done? Concerned if that happens. Yeah, I'm concerned about that too. I think RJ Cooper is also sort of the recruiting may end, but I think he's going to be a 3 technique. I think that's kind of where he's ultimately going to be. I don't think he's being recruited to, as the 4th end. I think if him and Tyson Ford are in the same class, one of them is going to move inside. So I think that's where you get your second defensive tackle. I think if they only end up with if they only end up with Hinish, I think the problem is now you almost have to move Tyson Ford inside, which is not an ideal situation. But I don't think they're going to – I think the Caleb Artis ship has sailed at this point in time. So I don't think it would be him. Searcher Green says, oh, that's good. I was afraid it might be a case of the new DC being hired and feeling he has to honor an offer from before he was hired. I don't think that's at all a case at all. And again, too, this is June 5th. Marcus Freeman was hired like June, about January 5th. So it's been, 6 months. I think he's had plenty of time to say, hey, this isn't a kid we want. I think everybody was on board for this one. When the final decision was made, I think everybody's on board with this one. Justin Knox asks, Brian, how would you currently rank the defensive staff and recruiting alone? Obviously, Marcus Freeman leading the way. I don't really do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I think that can be misleading. So like if I had to rank them 1 to 4, for example, one of Marcus Freeman, Mike Elston, or Mike Mickens is going to be third. And then it kind of seems like, well, he's the second to worst recruiter on the staff or on the defensive staff. But that's not how I look. It's like, to me, there are plus recruiters, solid recruiters, and bad recruiters. That's how I point it into. Plus recruiters, I think now Notre Dame finally has 3 plus recruiters on defense. I think that Mike Mickens, Marcus Freeman, and Mike Elston are all plus recruiters, which means they're good at building relationships, they're good at identifying top players, and they're good at finishing. Now, Mike has got to show it in year 2. He did a great job in year 1. Coach Freeman's got to show that he can close on guys too, and then obviously Mike Elston's done a really good job. But I think it's more about putting them into categories and who fits into those categories. And the plus recruiters, whether they're dogs, the alphas, however you want to describe, really, really good recruiters. Now they have to have a better product on the field at some of those positions and have more NFL success to get even better players on the board. But I am very comfortable with 3 of the 4 defensive coaches when it comes to recruiting. And the only reason I don't have Chris O'Leary on there is just because he's been hired just a couple months and we haven't really had a chance to see him in action. He hasn't had anybody on campus, and it's a little early. Well, it's a little too TBD is why he is on there for right now. Matt D says, I have had reservations about Coach Quinn and player development for a few years. You're not alone. And there's a lot that went on to this past season. So look how good this last year's team. There's a lot more to this past year than just Jeff Quinn. And there's only so much I'm able to say about that without potentially creating some problems. But it wasn't just Jeff Quinn coaching them up. And it wasn't just Chris Watt coaching them up. There was a lot more to it. Is Hinish's high school still a powerhouse where you want to continue a good relationship? Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've already offered the freshman linebacker from his high school. So is it a powerhouse like IMG or Modern Day? No. Is it a program you want to continue to recruit? Yes, you do. And when guys like him come along, you get guys like that. DeMar Hamlin was from that high school. Remember, he went to Pitt. I believe he got drafted this year. That's a very good high school. Torrey Phillips says, thoughts on Amorian Walker visiting Ole Miss? Feels like the wide receiver from Texas could take a spot if he continues to look around. So I did some digging on this. Apparently, what he told Notre Dame was he was just there with his team for a camp. And he wasn't there to visit Ole Miss. Now, I've read some articles that he did with Ole Miss sites, and his words were completely different. I mean, he says, in one article, I believe from 247 Sports, he said, Ole Miss gained ground. Firmly committed to Notre Dame, but Ole Miss gained ground. I mean, for me, look, I mean, you're telling people that you're legitimately looking at Ole Miss. He said in that article he plans to go back to Ole Miss. Notre Dame isn't worried about it. I would kind of tell him to, if you're taking visits, then you're not committed to us anymore, like you treat everybody else. And to your point, Tori, if that's what he wanted to do and he ends up committing somewhere else and he's replaced by Nick Anderson, I can live with that. I can live with that for sure. Matt D says, on the other foot. That's not good. So give me a shout later, buddy. We'll talk about it. But certainly be praying for you. So that does not sound fun. I know the last one wasn't a whole lot of fun for you. All righty. Liam Gaming, Hinish didn't seem to have a lot of offers for what that's worth. Was it because most felt he was indie bound? Yeah, I think that's part of it. Absolutely. I mean, if you're Penn State, you're not going to offer this kid if you know you're not going to get him. I absolutely think there's something to that. Absolutely. John A1 says, watch several YouTube O-line only games of Cain Madden. He's strong, short, and slow. Brian says, Indy scheme demands more athleticism, so now I join the sentiment of IB with the Madden pickup. And that's what I always want you to do, John, and I want you to always watch film. Come to your own conclusion, right? And some of you may say, well, I'm not a film watcher. That's okay. The more you watch it, the better you get at it. The more you watch it, then you listen to the things that we talk about, you'll start to see those things. So, watch the film so watch some of those games. And again, you can just type Marshall OL and Marshall OL, UAB, Rice, and App State, I think is the other one. Pop those in and watch them. But then watch them through the lens of, okay, Brian wrote, read the article I wrote at Irish Breakdown where I film them. I do positives. It's basically weaknesses. And say, okay, he talks about this, and then look for those things and see what I'm talking about. And then always ask questions, right? My email address is as simple as it can be, brian@irishbreakdown.com, right? My DMs are always open, right? I don't have closed DMs on Twitter. I want people to be able to reach out to me. I want to be accessible. And so if you're watching film and you have a question, ask me, hey, you said, or if you're reading an article, ask me, hey, you said this about this kid. I don't know what that means. Talk to me through it. And I will. I love talking ball, right? So, yes, I appreciate, John. I appreciate the fact that you watch film, but come to your own conclusions. And, John, you did. You watched it and you agree with me because of what you saw. But if somebody else watches film and they see something different, great. Let's talk about it. That's what makes it fun. Ezekiel Robinson, big ups, Brian. Big ups, Vince. The passion for and knowledge of our beloved Notre Dame is apparent every time I watch a broadcast. Thanks. I appreciate that very much because, we kind of thought about how to do this show and, should we make it more professional and more just – and it's like, no, if we're going to do this all the time, let's have some fun with it. But, let's let people see our personality and see that we are passionate. We're not just passionate about Notre Dame, but we're passionate about football. Love the game of football. And I appreciate you watching, obviously, and then I appreciate the kind words. Absolutely. John A1 says, are there any D-line recruits on the board not named Lucas or Moss? Yeah, RJ Cooper is one, and I know this question came in before I talked about RJ Cooper. But RJ Cooper's one from Texas. He is looking at Stanford a lot. He's supposed to visit Notre Dame the last weekend of June. That right there, that's the only other D-line recruit that I think is a legitimate candidate for Notre Dame at this point in time. All righty. Matt D says, I would think that Anthony Lucas would be the top choice at defensive tackle moving forward. Oh, but he's always been the top choice at defensive tackle. I mean, from the beginning, Anthony Lucas has been their top choice. Liam Gaming, NFL player personnel guy I know wasn't too impressed by the Madden film I sent him. I honestly don't know anyone that actually watches football that has been like, oh, this is a great pickup. I haven't. In my film breakdown, I also got some analysis from Ryan Roberts from Coast to Coast Scouting. Ryan used to do the Locked On Irish podcast. He had me on his show. Developed a relationship with him. He's going to hopefully start doing some NFL draft stuff for Irish Breakdown, which I'm very excited about. But he wrote a breakdown too, and it's very fair, very honest. But he said, look, this kid's just not a Notre Dame caliber player. I literally don't know anyone. I talked to a friend of mine in the Notre Dame world that has watched his film too, and I just haven't seen anybody that actually watched the film and said, boy, that kid's really good. And it's just the reality. It's just what it is. Mason says the class of 2024 kid, that's Anthony Specca, I believe, Specca, kid that goes to Hinish's high school, is a beast. For a freshman, yeah, he is a beast. Vince, watching while at soccer, the things that have to go along with being a parent. Brandon says that would be a crazy turn of events, talking about Anderson and the Walker situation. Swap Walker with Anderson and then lock down Williams and Merriweather. Now that's a class I would be happy about. I'd still be upset with that there's no Xavier Bradshaw. I'd still be upset that it's all outside guys. But yeah, that would be a much better class in my opinion. And Justin Knox, man after my own heart. Don't forget Bradshaw, Brandon. Amen. Don't forget Bradshaw. Matt Diaz, hearing anything about the wide receiver C.J. Williams and how Notre Dame is doing in his recruitment? I think they're in good shape. I mean, the visit's going to come up. I think he's coming in the last weekend of June. I believe, off the top of my head, that's when he's coming in. I think they've done a great job with it. I think Tommy Reese has really done a good job. Coach Alexander stepped up his game in that recruitment. Brian Kelly's been involved. So ahead of the visit, I think Notre Dame's in a good place. I really do. Brad S. says, agree if Walker's looking at Ole Miss or doing stuff, tell him offer gone. Does Kelly do that and revoke it if verbals start visiting elsewhere? What do you do? Would you do that to a 5-star? No. Look, here's the deal. Recruiting is no different than coaching. And the motto that I was taught at the very beginning as a coach and that I had as a coach is, and I'd say to my players, I'm going to treat all of you fairly. I'm not going to treat you all the same. And that's just life, right? If Anthony Lucas was committed and decided he wanted to take visits, do you kick him out of the class? No, no. Some other players, maybe you would. Maybe you would. Searching, I was legit about to Google who Swap Walker is. Oh, Black Rush. Feels like a football 101 class every time I tune in. Great work. I appreciate that, buddy. It means a lot. I truly do. I don't know if this sounds like an insult. I think we are aware you love talking football. I don't know. That kind of seems like an insult a little bit. But yes, I do. And I don't mind telling you. So you can be upset about it if you want, but I enjoy talking football, and I don't mind telling people I like talking football. Mason says Notre Dame offered the first QB in the class of 24, Julian Sain. I'm not sure if you watched this kid film, but he's a smooth operator. Man, he can really spin. Yeah, he can, especially for a freshman. He's really good. He's really good. Richard Robinson, great show, brother. Is this Lucas kid the type of space eater that Clemson and Bama usually get? One thing our front seven needs. I don't think our front seven needs that, Richard. I really don't, because that's not the scheme that Marcus Freeman employs. The reason that Clemson needs those guys is when you watch how they use their D tackles, they want big space eaters. That's their scheme. Bama likes space eaters. Notre Dame is a penetration, attacking, making plays with your interior guys type of offense or defense. And so I don't think they need 315 pounders. They need guys that are strong and that can penetrate. And Anthony Lucas is that kind of guy. He is not a space eater. He is a penetrator. He is to me, he is Sheldon Day's game with like Isaac Rochelle's body, but bigger. I mean, he's a bigger 6'4", 275, 280, big long arms, really athletic, super fast hands, just a really, really dominant player. We should do a film room on the defensive line, the commits, and then Anthony Lucas soon. Maybe we might do that. John A1, who is your top recruit, offense or defense on the board? I mean, Anthony Lucas. I mean, this is the perfect show to ask that question. I mean, Anthony Lucas is the biggest must-get that Notre Dame has in this class, in my opinion. Liam says, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, Liam, it's a good question. I wonder how the DB Evans from Tulsa, if he commits, would affect the younger guys in the DB room. I think it would have an impact because the opportunity for them some of those guys to play would be gone, and I think there probably would be some hurt feelings on that. But at the same time, when he gets out there, they're going to realize this guy's really good. And I think most guys get that. Brandon says, I never forgot about Bradshaw. Good. Bonus points for you. Love him, and Notre Dame needs him in the class. It just seems that Notre Dame isn't pushing for him. Hopefully that changes. And you are correct about that, Brandon. About all of that is correct. Liam says, how do you even find out about a ninth grader recruiting-wise? Do they send you film, their coach, 7-on-7 camps? Well, in the case of this kid, he played this spring as a freshman, right? So that's kind of where that one comes from. But a lot of it is just film. It's camp stuff. That's really what it boils down to. It's going to be camp stuff. Chris says not upset, so it was not an insult. So I appreciate that. Tori Phillips says, have you seen any film of Alec Manor? Didn't mean to say it like that. He's camping in Notre Dame this weekend, hoping to get an offered. I don't want him to offer that kid, and I have seen film of him. I mean, look, I'm sure he's going to blow it up at camps. I've heard he's 6'3", 215. He's from Canada. I think he's playing at a prep school in Massachusetts. I don't think he's better than what you've already offered, and he's another power forward. I mean, that's it. And they say, he's got real good vertical speed. Okay, fine. So does Tobias Merriweather. He's not better than the guys you have, and that's not the kind of kid you need to be adding to your board. You need to be adding guys that are dynamic with the ball in their hands, and he's just not that guy. So I've seen film. I've seen camp film. He's just – no, I'm sorry. You can't keep talking about how you don't have enough playmakers and explosive playmakers and then keep recruiting the same guys you've always recruited. You just can't keep doing it and expect anyone to take you seriously. Brandon says, how do you feel about the new freshman receiver from Long Beach that Notre Dame just offered? Forgot his name, but wow, electric. Now that's the type of player Indy needs to get in the mix early with. I haven't watched him. I watch I don't watch a ton of 2023 film right now. I've watched maybe 3 2024 kids. The quarterback, I've watched a kid from Pittsburgh, and then there was a defensive end that I saw. I mean, it's great that they're getting involved early with freshmen, but that's so far down the road. And I've already got so much more film to watch that I just I haven't paid a lot of attention to it. Then Tori followed up with that same question again, but then another potential Walker replacement if he is offered. Yeah, I mean, they're similar players. They're low floor, high ceiling guys. I think the thing that Alec has on his and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, and I apologize if I'm not. But the thing I like about him compared to Amorian Walker, they're very similar, like low floor, high ceiling guys. But the one thing this kid has is this kid's a lot thicker than Amorian. Amorian's like 175 pounds. He's a really skinny kid. He has a high ceiling, but this kid brings some of the same attributes, has some of the same concerns that I have as a player, but he's bigger. So if you were to say, hey, look, would you, if you lose Amorian Walker, would you replace him in the class with this kid? Well, maybe, I think, but that's where maybe you'd like to see a Nicholas Anderson type of player. But yeah, I mean, if he was their third receiver and they were going to get Tobias and CJ Williams or Tobias and Bradshaw or CJ and Bradshaw, whatever the case may be, then yeah, I could live with that. But look, you got to get Tobias Merriweather and Xavier Bradshaw and CJ Williams. Those 3 guys are you must get. You have to get those guys. And they can. You should at least get 2 of them. Brad S., great show as always. Thank you. Best around in my view. Thank you again. Any idea what big recruits are coming next week? Yeah, so let me pull up my visit list. So I had somebody ask this today on the show, so I'm gonna do this. So I'm gonna pull up. I'm gonna just kind of walk you through how to do this. So this is how you can find the visit list at Irish Breakdown. Okay. All righty. So let's pull this up here real quick. It's real easy to find, and then we can kind of go over what your question is because again, this I think will help some people. So here's Irish Breakdown's website. Let me get to this bigger view of that. So if you go up here, and it'll be the same. This is on desktop. It'll be the same on mobile. But if you go up here to this right here, and you'll see those on desktop as well. And you just go down to ND Recruiting, and then you go down to right there, Notre Dame Prospect Visit Schedule. And then you'll see the guys. Now, there's some guys that like 247 Sports and Rivals have down as visits that we don't have on there because we don't just take from their list. We try to confirm first. But this is we're pretty caught up. This is also just mostly 2022 guys. So to your question, let me get back to your question here real quick. All righty. Brad S. says, any idea what big recruits coming next week? So this is the list that I have for next week right here. And here's how it goes. Big recruit, 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 big recruit. I mean, it's a big, huge weekend. Now, Jake Pope, to me, would be at the bottom of that list, but that is a huge weekend. And then you're going to see that Tyson Ford and Jalen Sneed arrive the day after all those guys show up. So, to me, if Notre Dame just hits a grand slam home run in this weekend, they will have a top 5 class. Just from this weekend, and I would include that there too. Just from that group alone, that would be a huge weekend. And I think that eventually they're going to get several guys from that group. But yes, the next weekend is a huge, huge weekend for Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint. Justin Knox, Brian, who are the plus recruiters on offense? All right, next question. Kai S. Maybe the staff feels really good about this year's team and thinks that Cain gets the O-line over the hump. I don't agree, but I'm sure they think that. And this is what we talked about in yesterday's show, Kai. I'm not sure. You didn't have any questions, so I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, but we talked a lot. So if you didn't watch yesterday's mailbag, just go check it out, because we had a lot of good talk about Cain Madden, and we talked about this very thing. I mean, I think, look, I have my opinion of Cain Madden, and it's not the same as the Notre Dame staff's opinion of Cain Madden. And that's fine. And I hope that they're correct, but we understand where they're coming from. It's just based on his film. I don't like the decision, but if they're right and I'm wrong, this is a great pickup, because look, it's like this. If Cain Madden genuinely can play at Notre Dame like a second team All-American that he was listed as last year, this is huge for Notre Dame. Huge, because it solidifies the line. And if they're right about him, the O-line's no longer a question mark. You've got Jarrett Patterson, who's one of the best returning interior blockers in the entire country. You've got Josh Lugg, who's a really talented football player. You got one of the best freshman tackles in the country. You've got a guy that started for you in the the college football playoff, started for you in a road win over North Carolina, who's a preseason top 10 team, was a top 100 recruit. And then you got this other kid who's a second-team All-American. If he's as good as advertised and he's a second-team All-American, Notre Dame's offensive line is not a concern anymore. It's just not. And so I think that's where they're coming from, and it adds depth. So if they're right, I get it. It's just my personal opinion based on watching film is that he's not that guy. And I don't think he gets him over the hump. But they think they obviously think he does. And I hope they're right. I really do. Matt D says Tobias and CJ would be great gets at wide receiver in the 22 class. Agree completely. All righty. Jim Vlaming says, Coach, how would you compare McLeod to Evans? Great show, Coach. Appreciate that very much, Jim. So I think Caleb Evans is a significantly better player than Nick McLeod. And I said this yesterday, and I'm going to reiterate it today. In my opinion, Caleb Evans not only walks on campus and is the best cornerback on campus, hands down, I think he could have an opportunity, especially if he stays 2 years, to be Notre Dame's best cornerback of the last decade. I truly believe that. I think he's that good. Now, part of that's going to be he's going to have to get a little bit better with his ball skills, but his ability to just flat out cover, he's about as close to a lockdown cornerback as you're going to see, in my opinion. Now, he's not a burner, but he runs well. He really fluid hips, changes his direction with ease, a really natural athlete, and what he lacks in speed, he makes up for by being incredibly long and physical at the point of attack. So to me, and look, I've seen him play against Oklahoma State. I've watched film of him against Mississippi State, and I didn't see the Texas game, but I saw the stats from the Texas game. So I've watched this kid play a lot, and I'm telling this kid is a gap closer, no question about it. Nick McLeod was a good football player that stabilized a position that otherwise would have been a major concern, and it was great that they got him, because it would have been a problem if they didn't. But just comparing these two, Caleb Evans is a significantly better player, in my opinion. Liam says, can you assume the RB recruit from Philly, he's talking about Nicholas Singleton, has good hands, pass receiving, since his team runs the option? No, because he bobbles the option a little bit more than I'd like. So I don't know if I could say that. But it's also different. Catching a pitch is a whole lot different than catching a ball that's coming from 15, 20 yards away. So I don't think you can assume it, but I've always kind of felt like quarterbacks have great hands because they have to catch the ball so much. So being a little hypocritical there, but that is also my own bias because I was a quarterback and I did have great hands. I'm kind of kidding there. Being a little bit more arrogant than I actually think, but I did have really good hands. Mason says, if Nwankpa commits after his visit today, I might genuinely cry. I get it. I get it. There are some other really good safeties on the board, but I get it. He's very good. And that's the key. Notre Dame had to convince him, don't commit this weekend. Don't commit this weekend. Don't commit this weekend. You can commit to them on June 19th or 21st for all we care, but just come visit with us. Robert says a kickoff on September 5th. The temp will be 85 and humidity the same. Freeman will be sending wave after wave on defense and will dominate the second half. That's obviously against Florida State. Now, the other positive to that too, Robert, is that it's going to be a night game. So it won't be quite as humid in the second half, but I agree with you. They're just going to be sending waves of front seven players at Florida State. And yeah, that's going to be big time. All righty. So, all right. So you got that, Justin, from me answering your question or not answering your question. I will say this in all seriousness. I think Tommy Rees can be a plus recruiter. I do. I just need to see a little bit more from him. That's all. But I really like the work he's putting in on the recruiting trail right now. I think he's really connecting well with kids. I think he's grinding like crazy. I just think the problem that Tommy Rees has is he doesn't have as great of a supporting cast as some other coaches do. I think Lance Taylor's a good recruiter. He has to show me a little bit more. And I think if he can close with Dallin Hayden or Nicholas Singleton or Gavin Sawchuk, then yeah, I would put him in that category. But that would be it at this point in time. All right, Matt D. I think that answered the question about offensive recruiting at Notre Dame in a nutshell. No one needs to ask any further about why we swing and miss. Just miss on offensive recruits, often swing late. See, again, I think it's more of a work problem than it is a talent problem. And as I said, I do believe that Tommy Rees can be a plus recruiter. I think he's going to need more time to get to that point. And he's 29 years old. He's been really, his first year as an offensive coordinator, he couldn't have people on campus. I mean, he couldn't. He did a great job getting. He was the driving force behind Deion Colsey getting back in the class. He got Tyler Buckner, got Drew Pine. I think Coach Rees has done some good things. Before I can put him in that plus category, I just need to see a little bit more from him. But honestly, it's more about just for him. The reason I hesitate to do it is because can you hold the rest of your staff accountable? Because look, the fact is a coordinator has to be held to a different standard than a position coach. Mike Mickens can only worry about his position. Lance Taylor can only worry about his position. Marcus Freeman has to make sure he's holding the whole defensive staff accountable. Tommy Rees has to do the same thing. And if he's able to get some of those guys to get their fannies going and they are able to finish this offensive class on a strong note, then I'm going to put him in that plus category. I just need to see a little bit more from it. And then last question here from Mason or comment. To me, the addition of Madden is worth it based off the experience factor alone. And I understand that, but the fact is experience is not enough because if he doesn't play well, then all you've done with that experience is you've taken reps away from significantly more talented players. That's it. Because you're going to have to break those reps up. You can't, somebody's going to lose reps. So as opposed to, let's say there's 1,000 reps in fall camp to be had at right guard. I'm just throwing a number out. There's probably more than that. Say there's 1,000 reps to be had. The fact of the matter is right now you plan on splitting those reps up between two guys, essentially, if we're talking about the starting job. Now you're going to split those reps up between, three guys? So think about the less work that Rocco and Christopher are going to get now. So that's a problem. So it's not just him being experienced doesn't help you. He has to be able to play well. If he doesn't play well, then all he did was look good on the depth chart and take away reps from younger players. That's it. He has to play well. That's why I say this is a boom or bust move. If he's as good as the Notre Dame staff thinks he is, this is going to be a great pickup. It's going to solidify the offensive line, and now there's no excuses on offense. If he's not as good as they think, then this is going to end up hurting them because now you've stunted your development for Rocco and Andrew Kristofic going into the 2022 season. That's just how I feel it. Let's see. We had a couple more questions come in. Liam says, when you say that XYZ needs to have a great couple months, June, July, August, and ball out, what can a guy like Tosh do to make that jump? It's just about being more consistent with how he plays. I think the problem with Tosh is he's still learning to play with better pad level because he's so tall. I think he is learning to play with the extra. He put a lot of weight on in a year. I think he's working on that. I think he's got to improve his footwork a ton. He played too high. He lunged a lot. It's just about cleaning up the technique. If he's out there every day putting in the work and all of a sudden he's sitting back, he's kind of sinking his butt a little bit. He's being patient as a pass blocker. He's striking instead of lunging. So what that means is what you'll see from Tosh a lot is he gets in his pass set and he's kind of tall, which is not good. And then when a guy tries to go around him, he kind of leans at him instead of patient, let the guy come to you and then strike, right? There's going to be times, if you watch Liam Eichenberg, there's times when Liam Eichenberg gets all the way back before he strikes and locks the guy out because you got to let that guy come to you. As soon as you go to him, a lot of times you're going to have to stop your feet and he's going to run around you or put a move on you. So I think it's just being more efficient with how he goes about his business is the big thing. Other guys, it's, the guy's almost there. He just needs to, maybe drop 5 pounds or maybe add 5 pounds. I mean, there are things like that, but for a guy like Tosh to make that big jump, it's going to be about the additional weight room, but it's really just about, okay, I got my butt kicked in the spring and I need to get in the film room, figure out why, talk to Coach Quinn, figure out why, and then work on those things. And when you work on them, you get better at them, and that's how you take that big jump for a younger. And you'll see those big jumps come more from younger players than you will from older players. Brad S., does Kelly keep assistants on too long if they are not recruiting or developing guys well, or is he like other good college coaches, scared of changing coaches, or does he think they are coaching good? I think – see, y'all are trying to get me downvoted today. I think Kelly's not always as locked in as the day-to-day things going on as he needs to be, and so it takes him a while longer to realize that things are being a problem. He left Autry Denson on the staff too long, and he left Brian Van Gorder on the staff too long. He didn't hold some other assistant coaches accountable for the fact that they weren't recruiting the way that they needed to or developing the way they needed to. And that's because there isn't that day-to-day being there, making sure that everybody's working towards the same goal as you need to be. He does have more of the distractions. And so, yeah, I think he's made that mistake far too many times. Not always, but he was a year too late, at least a year too late, reacting to Brian Van Gorder. I mean, what we all knew in 2020, 2014, Brian Kelly didn't figure out till it was almost too late. Paul Longo, he didn't see the signs there. That wasn't working. That Coach Longo was not the same guy he was before. So I think those things he's been slow to see. Not holding a certain offensive coach accountable for both of those things is something that needs to change. I think also it's an unwillingness to admit that he's wrong about something. He's way too stubborn when it comes to that, and I think that's a part of the reason we see this as well. Mason says, I'm interested in who you think Notre Dame has the greatest chance of landing out of the big three running backs on the board. If we landed Singleton, how would you compare him to Price, who's already in the class? So, to me, I think they have a decent shot at all of them. If I had to rank the three, I'd go Hayden, Sawchuk, Singleton is confidence. Now, I think all three are going to be tough, and I could see them striking out at running back. I could with those three. And, yeah, that'd be disappointing, but, you can live with it because you have Price. Singleton and Price are a little bit different. Price is more of a natural running back right now. Singleton is more of an upside guy because, as you mentioned earlier, I think it was you, somebody else maybe mentioned it, but he does play in a triple option offense. He runs a lot of outside zone, a lot of option stuff. He doesn't run a lot of inside zone counters, those kind of things where he's got to be patient, make reads and those kind of stuff. He's just an athlete right now, and a really good one. Good size, great second gear, good in space. And I think he has those traits. He just doesn't get to use them a whole lot. Hayden's the more natural running back to me. He's the guy that I think maybe he has a lower ceiling, but to me, he's the most polished player. I think that would go. I think that would go. He would fit in really well with this Notre Dame defense. But the thing about Singleton and Price is kind of an inside, zone guy, catch the ball. Singleton's more of a home run hitter. So it'd be kind of like, it'd be similar to me to what we saw from like the Josh Adams, Dexter Williams combination is with Price being like Dexter and Singleton being like Josh Adams. I think is kind of where that would fit. Matt D says, I think Reese is in a bind, and that's the tough part about being a 29-year-old OC, keeping guys accountable when they are all older than you and being around longer. He needs to break through that. I agree. If Notre Dame lands Evans, is he a one-year player or two? Okay, so he has 2 years of eligibility. I would have to say that I hope he's only a one-year player. The reason I say that is because I think there's a lot of NFL scouts, from what I've been told, there's a lot of NFL scouts that are very intrigued by Caleb Evans. It's just he had an injury the year before in 2020. This year was a shortened season, a strange season. You didn't really get to play a lot of non-conference games. Tulsa had to cancel some games. He only played 3 games in 2019 before he got hurt. So he kind of needs another year to develop. If he has the kind of year that I hope he can have, I just have a feeling he's going to be considered a higher draft pick. Maybe not first round, maybe, but definitely a day 2 guy. And that might be enough for him to leave. Would I love him for 2? Sure. But I still, even though he has 2 years of eligibility left, I think he's probably a one-year player because I just think he's that good, and I think the NFL is going to come calling. And maybe that's just wishful thinking, but But yeah, I think that would probably be more like it. John A1, thanks, Coach. Have a great weekend. I appreciate it, John. John also had a comment, says apparently Ohio State blew Zach Rice away during his visit, according to Bleacher Report. It doesn't surprise me. Ohio State does a great job on visits. Okay. Justin Knox, thanks, Brian. Always enjoy listening, usually after the fact, but I love when I can participate live. Great access. Yes, I think it's more fun that way, in my opinion, when people can interact. At least it is for me. Robert Butcher says, India's beaten SC recently and will this year because our coaching staff is superior. I agree completely. I also think Notre Dame has better players. I think USC's talent is overrated. Absolutely. I think Notre Dame is going to beat USC this year, and I think they're going to do it convincingly. Because here's the other thing. Marcus Freeman has seen this type of offense plenty in the AAC. The air raid that they're running at USC is not going to be new to him at all. It's not even as high-powered as you'd expect. Like, it's not even as good as Washington State's from a production standpoint, and they don't run the ball. So I think he's going to be more than prepared for that. And I think Notre Dame has better players on both sides of the ball. And definitely have better coaching, to Robert's point. So I think Notre Dame will beat USC this year. USC is not a team that maybe I should be more concerned about USC because it's USC and it's a rivalry game. And I've always had that belief that, hey, look, rivalry games, you kind of got to throw out the records. But at the same time, Notre Dame doesn't often lose to teams that they're significantly better than, and I think they're significantly better than USC. Great show today from Matt D. Appreciate that, Matt. D-Rock, love your candid responses, Brian. I appreciate that. I'm always going to give them to you. Tori Phillips says, where do you think Notre Dame stands with Evans? Mizzou seems to be the school they have to beat out. It's Missouri and Texas are the two that they have to beat out. Both of them are legitimate players for him. I think Notre Dame knocked it out of the park. I think Marcus Freeman did. I think Mike Mickens did. I think Mike Elson did. I think they knocked it out of the park. I think at this point in time, if he doesn't come to Notre Dame, it's just because it's for reasons that really don't necessarily have to do I don't think there's anything Notre Dame could have done different if they don't get him. I think that they're in a good place. I think they feel good about it, but they are also understand that Missouri and Texas are legitimate players. I think the thing that could help him going to Missouri is, look, Notre Dame's told him you got to beat guys out. We're not going to hand you the job. You got to beat guys out. And I don't think Caleb's afraid of competition, but I think grad transfers have to look at things differently. When you're a grad transfer and you got 1 to 2 years left, you've got to make sure you're going to a place where you know you're going to play. I don't like high school kids being guaranteed opportunities, but I'm more sympathetic to a grad transfer wanting some sort of guarantee. They don't all ask for it, but I think that I'm sympathetic to that. Missouri, I would imagine Missouri's telling them, yeah, you're going to play because they don't have the corners that Notre Dame has. But the fact is he'd be their best corner the minute he steps foot on campus. EM Gaming says, kid from Bishop Gorman, that'd be Jake Taylor, is better than Zach Rice. I agree. We're in the minority on that one, but I agree. Brandon says, the offense that Singleton runs in high school is why he's my number 3 pick out of the big 3. Never thought that would ever be the determining factor for winning certain players in Notre Dame. He's definitely not my number 3. He's my number 2, and he has the highest ceiling of the 3, in my opinion. His offense just means he may need a little more time to get comfortable, but from a talent standpoint, he has the highest ceiling of all the backs on the board. He would be my it's really 1A and 1B. Dallin Hayden's my 1A, Singleton's my 1B. If I could take any of them, I'd take Hayden, but I'd take Singleton over Sawchuck. But I'd be happy with all 3 of them. Kai S says, Tobias is my number 2 want in this class. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Mason says, and we're going to wrap up with this. Mason says, USC is very top-heavy when it comes to talent. Notre Dame has 2 times the talent USC has when you consider the depth of the entire roster. I agree. And I would argue that Notre Dame's 5 best players are better than USC's 5 best players. I would make that argument too. So, yes, I think that Notre Dame has a significantly better talent than USC. I think they're better coached than USC. But at the same time, rivalry games, you just never know. But if it comes down to just talent and coaching, I think Notre Dame wins that game and wins that game convincingly. Mason says, I'm also in love with Jake Taylor's game. I'm not sure who is better, but him and Rice are 1A and 1B for me. Taylor, to me, is significantly better in my opinion. And we're going to wrap up with D-Rock. Hit the like button. I appreciate that very much. Hit the like button. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. Hit the notification bell. And the reason you hit that is because when you hit it, you're going to get told that we have podcasts coming up, right? You're going to get told what time it is. You can set your reminders for it and everything. Ask questions after the show. If you're on YouTube and you're watching this not live, ask questions, interact, engage. That's all those things help us with whatever their algorithms are. The more engagement that we have with you, after the show, the better it is for us and the more people see it, and it helps us grow this channel. So appreciate everybody taking time out of their beautiful Saturday afternoons to spend time talking recruiting. I'm going to go up, get ready, go have some lunch with my wife. I got to mow the lawn today. So got a very busy day today. We've got a What's Next article at irishbreakdown.com to check out where I talk about Moss and Lucas in depth, talk about Donovan Hinish. That's on the front page. I have a film breakdown of Cain Madden on the front page where I give my thoughts. Ryan Roberts from Coast to Coast Scouting also gives his thoughts. If you missed the mailbag yesterday, that's also on the front page in podcast form and video form on the front page of irishbreakdown.com. And we'll have more up. I'm looking at my list here. Where's my list of our articles I'm still working on? So I've got coming up here the rest of today and tomorrow. I've got we're going to do a running back breakdown of how Notre Dame stacks up against other top backfields. I'm going to look at proven production, give some opinions. And this is from a question that we got yesterday. I'm going to have my quarterback preview of Jack Cohn coming up later today. I'm going to update the big board with Donovan Hinish now being in the class. We've got a Donovan Hinish commit profile, which is the same as it's going to basically be the same stuff as I have as far as my analysis, but it has his offers and his rankings and all that stuff in it. That's on the front page now. You can check that out. I'm going to have the O-line big board article up tomorrow. I'm going to have a Drew Pine article up tomorrow. I'm also going to have an article up tomorrow that talks about the unique manner in which Notre Dame has to address transfers and what the dangers are and what type of transfers they should be looking for. And just kind of how it's not as easy as just adding a good player. It's not as easy as just saying develop the guys you have. It needs nuance, especially to a place like Notre Dame. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow as well. So again, everybody, thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again on Monday at 1 o'clock. And we're going to talk about, can this Notre Dame 2021 team compete for a championship? My answer is yes. We'll explain why on Monday. Talk to you again soon.